Hello, members. Tom Morrison here for another edition of Heat Treat Live. Today, we're excited to talk about remote workers and cybersecurity. So many of you right now are sending more workers home just due to the social distancing and all the other requirements coming down from your states and the federal, and more people working from home, which brings another level of concern and potential risk of at-home work with not Social Security, cybersecurity. Now we're on target. So I want to let each one of you know that before we get started, if you hover down at the bottom, you'll see a cursor of things. You can hit chat. A chat box will pop up. And during this presentation, when Nick's presenting, any questions, I mean, Monday we had questions like crazy coming in for the HR professional. So if you have any questions that you want to get clarification on from Nick as he's presenting, please dive in there, type your question in, and I will ask those. I'm going to be monitoring those. I will ask them to Nick as we go along. But before we get started, I would like to introduce our famed president for 2020, Mr. Jim Oakes from Super System. Jim, how you doing today?
I'm fine, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, so we met Monday and kind of reviewed with members a lot of stuff's going on. We were with Chad Sorensen. Today we're with Nick. So between Monday and today, as president, anything you want to say to the members, things that have been happening? What's going on?
Yeah, other than a couple phone calls a day from you and probably some other members, of course, navigating the waters of the changing tide that we have here. You know, of course, there's a stimulus package that passed in the Senate last night. It looks like it's probably not going to be signed in the House, but hopefully that will happen as soon as possible so that can become in law. And once that does happen, our goal is to have some experts out there to talk about what that means for our businesses. So that'll be something that we will, MTI will find some panelists and some experts out there that can help us navigate what the 1,400-page law means for our employees, for our businesses, and kind of go forward. We've put out on heattreat.net, there's a coronavirus webpage that has a lot of links to relevant information that probably is critical to your business, whether it's having essential work information. We have the webinars, of course, that we've done. This is our third one this week. We talked about earlier on with Chad Sorensen, we talked about the Families First Act, and that is now in law. And we had a great topics that Chad was able to address. And there's a number of other things that are out there. I mean, we have links to the CDC website, links to NAM. So there's a bunch of resources that we would encourage you to take advantage of. And as things evolve, we will continue to update those and get as much information out to the membership as possible. But with that said, today's our third webinar. For those of you that were in Vancouver in September or October, in the fall of this year, Nick Espinosa was there for us and talked about cybersecurity. And we really appreciate the opportunity, taking the opportunity to share with us as we move to a somewhat of a remote workforce. I mean, I know I can speak for us. We have 60% of our people that are working telecommuting, and typically we only have about 20 to 25% of those. So we've moved a lot of people external and accessing and performing their work from the safety of their homes. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to you, Tom.
Well, Jim, thanks for that. One thing to remember, members, too, is if you go out to the coronavirus resource page on heattreat.net, we just uploaded a new resource yesterday afternoon. Some members were calling in after the quality webcast yesterday on a affidavit that was mentioned that if anyone's visiting your place of business, whether it be an auditor, a supplier, whoever, anyone visiting your business that is not a part of the employeeship, it's a form that you would get them to sign and read and sign. It basically asks them if they've been to any of the countries that have had coronavirus cases, and if they've had any diagnosis of coronavirus, that they may be restricted from coming into the plant. So it's a great form. You can go out to heattreat.net, click on the coronavirus resource page, and then download that form at the top so you can put it on your letterhead and then start using it to document and letting people sign off that they know that they may be refused entry. So good stuff happening, good resources coming to you. And just so you know, this is being recorded. It'll be out on the coronavirus page by this afternoon when we're done, and you can share it with your team and anybody you think that needs to see this and just talk about the cybersecurity issues. So with that said, Mr. Nick, tell everybody about yourself in about 30 seconds, and let's hear what is going on with remote working.
All right, and guys, thank you for the intro there. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to go through my whole bio here because typically this presentation takes about an hour, hour and a half. Just for the audience, just FYI, and I told Tom and Jim before we started, I am currently presenting symptoms of this myself, shortness of breath and all of that. So I apologize if I have to pause and catch my breath or something like that. But I just want to say that we are getting a lot of requests for more information above and beyond this webinar. This is the primer for everything. And so, if any MTI member wants to jump on a quick call in the next few days, for 15, 20 minutes or so and talk about your specific case study needs or whatever that is, or your case needs for your business, I'm more than happy to do that free of charge. The MTI has been great. And so, this is something that I'm more than happy to do for any member that wants to take me up on that. The other thing I will say too is that Security Fanatics, my company, is now one of the founding members, and we're on the board of the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition as well, which is a combination of thousands of different companies, organizations, and governments around the globe right now, dedicated to intelligence and threat sharing to protect the hospitals around the globe. Because as we have seen workers go remote, we are seeing a massive spike in attacks on workers, but we're also seeing a massive spike on attacks on hospital and critical infrastructure. And so we are here to basically stop the jerks of the world from bringing down that critical stuff. So with that, we can dive right in. And here's our goals for today as we go through them. We're going to discuss the immediate technology and security challenges that remote workers are going to present to your organization. A lot of companies, when they are rushing to do these things, don't take these things into consideration or get a little hasty to move quickly. And so we have to step back and really assess the situation here. We're going to talk about cybersecurity frameworks along with a holistic approach to security. A lot of organizations may have an IT staff, but we need, especially with remote workers, a good understanding of how we need to approach data security and cybersecurity. And so I could do literally 2 hours on that alone in a presentation, but we're going to go through that in a couple of slides just to get you into that mindset of understanding what you should be looking at and what your IT staff really needs to be looking at, whether they're outsourced or internal to you for this. Excuse me. We're also going to be looking at what you need to do ASAP. And so by the end of this presentation, you should see some ideas and action items that you can take to your IT staff if they're not watching this to go ahead and get moving on that. We're also going to discuss advanced security policies and defensive measures. So we're going to go through what constitutes a good firewall antivirus. Not all of them are built the same. Some of them, quite frankly, suck. And so we are going to separate the good from the bad for you. And we're also going to talk about contingency planning, because a lot of companies may have a disaster recovery plan, or they may not have neither, but a contingency plan in a disaster or a situation like the coronavirus becomes beyond essential, because it helps for that smooth transition for your organization to move from, let's say, one location to completely remote or one location to another. And so we're going to go through that as well. Excuse me. And we're going to quickly review the critical technology that you should be running as an organization right now, even if you are still in the office and looking to shift remote. And so those are the things that we're going to be talking about. And again, any questions that come up, I know Tom is going to ask those for me as well. And please feel free to ask them, because it'll give me a chance to stop and catch my breath as well, which I think I'm going to need. So with that, let's talk about excuse me, let's talk about the major issues with remote workforces in a national emergency, because there's a lot of things that, as we are moving our organizations out, we don't really think about, and we really need to start looking at this. The first one is that infrastructure throughout the country is starting to be taxed heavily. We can look at Italy as the perfect example of this. The CEO of Italy basically in an interview said that the internet infrastructure in Italy has spiked more than 70% in the first week of them locking down the country, and they attributed that primarily to kids staying home and playing things like Fortnite and Netflix and all that kind of stuff. And we are already starting to see proactive measures here in the United States YouTube, for example, and Netflix are going to start lowering the resolution and definition of the videos being output to save bandwidth. And if you didn't know, Netflix accounts for roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of all bandwidth in the United States.
Wow.
So that is a massive savings that we are going to be seeing. But by virtue of that, we also have to prepare for the fact that we may have slow and sluggish connections, which really ties into the next point here, is that collaborative platforms like Zoom, conference bridges that you call into are currently being overrun. And they are all adjusting to go to their providers for infrastructure and bandwidth and expand. But as companies have been rushing to this, we have been seeing a lot of complaints saying, it takes me 20 times to get into my conference bridge, just dialing the number, and on and on and on. And so be prepared for that. As you are attempting to spin up these collaboration platforms, there are many other companies doing the same thing. And the Zooms and the Microsofts of the world are aware of this. Excuse me. So they are being proactive in trying to spin that up to make it as smooth as possible.
So Nick,
but that is, yes.
Just to give you a chance to take a quick break. So now that you mentioned Zoom, I would encourage members too to think through sharing with your remote workers. Some people have never worked with Zoom before or done online platforms like this. And I'm hearing all kinds of stories of people, leaving their door open and their dog comes running in and barking, and they're not clicking mute when they're not talking. And even they're trying to talk and they haven't unmuted themselves so they can be heard. So as you mentioned Zoom, I'd encourage our members, if you do that stuff, find a list of best practices to give to your people at home so they know how to use the collaborative products in an efficient way.
Yeah, definitely understand the etiquette there. And also there are some security concerns, aside from the fact that you could show up in a bathrobe or less and you don't realize your video's on.
Right.
If you are dealing or talking with sensitive information, now that you are working from home, whether it's a DoD contract or anything, understand that the Amazon Echoes and the Google Homes of the world are always listening.
Mm-hmm.
And by virtue of that, if they've got skills that they've programmed in there, it could be recording things and you don't necessarily realize that happens. And that's a major cybersecurity concern as well. So if you're going to be talking about sensitive things, please make sure you're unplugging those or you're out of earshot with that. And that kind of dovetails with this, with that section. The other thing you have to consider is that you can't control the internet connection in your employees' homes. Some of them, quite frankly, are maybe living in the boonies and have horrible internet connections, or they've bought very basic packages, for internet speed, because at home all they do is check email or whatever. And now you're asking them to really turn on that bandwidth and use it. And so you may have a problem with some of your users getting in or using the tools that you are now spinning up, because they just don't have the bandwidth to deal with that. Your internet connection is now flipped. And this is what I mean by this. A lot of internet connections out there are actually asymmetrical in speed. So you can be in your office and you can have 100 megabit download capability, but your upload speed is 20 megabit, which is usually fine. Everybody works fine. But now when everybody is remote and they're connecting into the office, they're not going to see that 100 megabit connection. The best they're going to get is that upload speed, which is now their download into their home, and that's going to be at 20. And so a lot of you may actually have to go and talk to your internet service providers about upping your available speed. And internet service providers are obviously trying to shift more resources to home users as office buildings start to get empty, especially in major urban areas like here in Chicago, New York, LA, etc. As I mentioned before, we have seen an absolute just explosion in everything COVID-19 hackers. We've seen phishing emails that send out fake data or infected Word documents, or send you to links that say, here's the World Health Organization or trackers. Be very aware of this, because if you are sending your people remote and you are not giving them that advanced defensive technology that your business should be running, they're going to be more susceptible to getting hit. And if they're more susceptible to getting hit, depending on how they're connecting to your data, they may be introducing a severe amount of risk into your network. And so, excuse me, we're going to be talking about that as well. Your office infrastructure may be older and out of date and exposed to the internet, and that is a very serious issue that we have here as well. A lot of companies are running older technology or just simply not keeping it up to date with regular maintenance, and by virtue of that, hackers might be able to break through, evade, or simply circumvent a lot of the defenses you have in which case your defenses are very non-existent. And we've seen, again, a spike in the public facing side of firewalls, my house included. We have seen basically more noise in terms of hackers looking to see what people are running to try to get in. And now that nobody's there watching the barn, that's a very serious issue, because your IT in the next point is going to be home. And so how are they monitoring that infrastructure? How are you ensuring that you have the same level of visibility, in a remote workforce than you do in the office? Your IT person or company can't come in and run from desk to desk, updating or turning things off, if everybody's remote, nor are you expecting that person, to drive to 200 houses just to update something, so it's a serious consideration in terms of resource allocation and also visibility into the remote equipment. Also, and this is a very serious one that a lot of companies don't understand, but quite frankly, a lot of you are going to be in this boat, is that there is gray area if you are asking an employee to use their own personal equipment as they for company use. You cannot put a virtual gun to anybody's head and say, you have to install our monitoring system, our antivirus, everything else. And right now the courts in the United States, while there's no definitive law, have traditionally in the lower courts been siding with employees when a company goes ahead and decides to, let's say, remote wipe a phone that had email on it, not blow the phone away for personal things, just simply remove the company email. That was done without permission for a terminated employee or an employee that quit. And so that's something that we have to consider. The other problem that we're having right now is that supply chains are severely hit. Like our own distributors, as we supply infrastructure and security equipment, everything's on back order right now, as are just things like laptops and all of that. My own mother-in-law, has been waiting 3 weeks to get a monitor so she can work with 2 monitors from home. And she ordered that from Best Buy, and Best Buy still hasn't shipped it. So these are things that we need to consider. Amazon is now giving target delivery dates, at least in the Chicagoland area, of April 21st. And a lot of stuff is coming sooner than that, but that's a huge hit from 4 hours, and we've got something. So it's definitely something to consider. And also, a lot of companies, as you move to, let's say, hastily spin this up, you start making poor choices in spinning up this. And oftentimes, one of the worst things you can do, especially as a leader of an organization, is get on the back of your IT team as they are trying to work through problems, because what happens is they start taking shortcuts to get everybody online, but that is introducing vulnerability and risk. And we have seen quite a few companies that we've consulted with simply take these shortcuts, and we're like, yeah, we could pretty much break in here in about 20 minutes, and start stealing information. So that's something that we really need to consider, with that. And so
So Nick, I have a cut. When I look at all this, 2 questions come to mind as I've been sitting here listening to what you're saying. So what about remote software like Log Me In and Go to My PC versus more traditional remote connection options like a remote desktop or VPN? What about that first?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I think there's a couple of different things that need to be considered for that. So if you are an organization, and we'll be talking about a little bit further about this later in the presentation, but if you're an organization that is simply opening up remote desktop, just saying, okay, we have a server and we can get you in, understand that you're introducing a good amount of risk, in doing that. A VPN is going to be significantly more hardened, and that is basically a virtual private network. So you're having people have an agent on their remote computer at home, and it is connecting to a firewall in your office to get access to those resources like servers and all of that. A Log Me In or Go to My PC, your IT company may also be using Screen Connect. It's very popular in the IT community. Basically takes control of the desktop, similar to remote desktop, but it's a little different of an experience. And so the pros and cons are simply this: you have to understand what your bandwidth is in order to make the best choice. If you are going with the Log Me In site, is you can keep your firewall completely locked down. You don't have to open up anything. That will have the encryption in transit as you're moving from your house to the office. That takes care of all of that for you, but it's also going to take more bandwidth. And because a lot of us have asymmetrical configurations in bandwidth, our upload speed is the fastest we're going to get when we're remote. And so if you've got a whole bunch of users trying to hit Log Me In, that may actually slow you down or just hinder performance, because nobody can get in, or you're going to go ahead and click on something and then it's going to open.
Right.
and then you click on something, and then it's going to open. And so that's something that we need to consider. Remote desktop gives you that ability to optimize itself a little better so that you can run it very lean. So even if you're on a lower bandwidth, but what we recommend typically is connecting an office. If you have to get into the office, like in other words, everything is not in the cloud for you.
Right.
Usually you can either use a log me in or go to my PC, something like that, if you've got the appropriate bandwidth. If you don't, then a VPN, a connection, and then you can use the VPN or a remote desktop within the VPN connection to get in, because the VPN is going to wrap that remote desktop connection that's insecure in a layer of encryption that is going to make it much more harder to hit.
Gotcha.
But again, a lot of this is going to come down to the calculation on bandwidth and what makes sense to you. Also, you may have the ability right now to spin up a VPN and remote desktop for free because you have the licensing and capability, and you're going to have to pay for a log me in. And so there's a cost calculation into that as well.
Right.
But the one thing you should never be doing is running open remote desktop to anything. That is a surefire way to get yourself hit and data exfiltrated. That's a serious issue.
So that's the highway on and off, and the cars drive on that, which is the remote worker. The big thing now that I see wrapped around all that is the keys to the car, which is the password. So can you speak to all this, how they should work with remote workers with the sense of passwords? And I know password managers, a lot of people keep that. How do all that interact with what you're talking about?
Yeah, so some of the issues that we have with password managers, and I'm not saying you shouldn't use a password manager, I'm just saying you should understand the pitfalls of that. And we'll be talking more about how to harden and keep those passwords safe later on in this presentation. But one of the issues that we have with password managers is that if we are syncing password managers, we have a service to it, like let's say 1Pass, LastPass, KeePass, etc. We have our phone over here and we have our computer over here. And as we update our phone, our computer gets updated, but it's not a direct connection between the two. When our phone gets updated, it goes to the cloud synchronizes it, and then it pushes it to the computer and vice versa. And so one of the largest targets that we have in cybersecurity are password clouds. If I'm able to crack 1Pass, LastPass, KeePass, game on. And so the goal here is to, one, keep the password databases encrypted as possible. And if you can keep them offline temporarily, that would be ideal. There are password managers like Dashlane, for example, that you can centrally manage, or your IT can centrally manage. And so you can choose how to sync it, where to sync it, and all of that to mitigate that threat. I personally use a Microsoft Excel file with all of my passwords, and then I use Protect Workbook with a 30-character password, and then I save that into an encrypted container, and that encrypted container gets synchronized everywhere. And if you're thinking, and that's 2 different 30-character passwords, and if you're thinking to yourself, Nick, you are absolutely high if you think I'm going to remember a 30-character password, my answer is this: these passwords are phrases from my childhood that, unless I go senile, I will never forget. And in my house, we had English, German, Spanish, and Hungarian. So feel free to figure that one out. So that's one of those things that you can make good choices in. And if you're going to use a password manager because it's just more convenient, understand the risks and understand you just have to keep it updated constantly, and ideally keep it offline to their clouds. And if you can centrally manage it through your IT or your infrastructure, then I would do that. Just make sure you're encrypting it and hardening it. But that's another really good question.
So a best practice is don't save your Excel file password in the Excel file and you forget it.
Yes. Ideally not. Ideally not. And don't save it on like a notepad on your computer either.
Right.
Just make sure it's nice and secure, in that sense. But I've literally challenged technical audiences to say, here's my container that has my Excel file in it, feel free to crack it. And 2 people have taken me up on that, and I still have all my money. So that's a good sign.
Well, thanks for answering those 2 questions. Those were popping in my mind as you were going through that.
All right. No, they're good questions. They're good questions. Thank you. All right. Now with that, let's talk about steps of cybersecurity and frameworks. And I'm going to go through this briefly because this is the important mindset that we as business owners need to get into when we are talking about the intellectual property, the proprietary data that we use, the compliant government data that we deal with when we are dealing with DFARS or NIST or anything like that. And so we're going to go into some of the basics here. And the first thing we're going to be talking about is the CIA. And we are not talking about the intelligence agency, but what we are talking about is the concept of confidentiality. How are we keeping that data confidential so that it is personal, it is private, and it is protected? How are we ensuring the integrity of the data to make sure that no hacker can come in and modify it, or even an employee can come in and modify it or destroy it, and basically making sure that it's accurate and authentic. And finally, and this is super important, especially with a remote workforce, the availability of the data. This is your uptime. How are we ensuring that your infrastructure is hardened enough to make sure that your workforce doesn't have needless outages and can reliably get access to this? That's very difficult in a remote work environment, as I mentioned in the previous slide, when you have users that just, you can't control their computers if you have to use their computers, and you can't control their internet bandwidth. And so those are some of the challenges that we have. But at the end of the day, what we are looking at by default of this is to focus on and protect the data. And because we are focusing on protecting the data, that basically requires us to protect the worker, to protect the user of the data as we are going through this. And so as we are looking at this, this is an important consideration to have. Now, with that, we apply the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or CIA, through the safeguards method. These are also known as controls or methodologies, depending on the framework, but a lot of them called safeguards. HIPAA compliance is a big fan of that, and they work very well. People understand, I think, safeguards better than controls. And so the first one is we are applying confidentiality, integrity, and availability through a technical safeguard. So this would be the firewalls that you're running, the antivirus that you're running, all of these different things. This is very important to the data security side of things, because this is what's going to check and make sure that that traffic is good, malicious. If somebody's trying to break in, this is part of that. The next one is physical. We are all going to be leaving our offices, which means our offices might be ghost towns. Well, we might then be ripe, especially in the case of a national emergency, for things like break-ins and theft. So how are we physically protecting that data? Is it in a server room under lock and key? Is it hardened? Is it in the cloud? In which case we're having our cloud providers maintain that. Understanding these things is very, very important. Also, a lot of organizations don't realize that they can actually implement physical security that might easily be hackable. So for example, a lot of those HID cards or Prox ID cards are not encrypted. We can clone those from 20 to 30 feet away and then just walk into buildings. That is a very serious issue. We actually caught that at a nuclear power plant, of all things. So that's one of those things that we really need to make sure that we are maintaining good physical security, especially because we're not going to be there watching. And so I hope everybody also has a good video surveillance system as well, especially on your very expensive equipment. And finally, the administrative side. While everybody hates paperwork, this is actually a very important thing to discuss, because this is the maintenance on your security. How are you updating your firewalls, the technical aspects of your company? Because we update either for advances in, like, let's say, the interface or features, but more importantly, we update for vulnerability. And so if you're not updating your machines, I don't care if it's an iPhone, an Android, a laptop, an Apple, whatever, these things need to be updated, or else it's very easy to evade. When we find vulnerabilities, they are published in something that is known as the CVE database, which means any hacker, good or bad, on the planet can literally go see the work that myself and other hackers have done, understand that attack code, copy, paste, and go. They don't have to reinvent the wheel to figure this out. And if they're able to determine that you're running X firewall, they can go to that database, pull up that firewall, and literally start every attack on the planet. This is why we update continuously. This is also your policies and procedures. And if you don't have policies for a remote workforce, it becomes very difficult in terms of corralling them and making sure they're not just productive, but also secure as well. People like to go where they go. People fall for phishing scams, and if you don't have procedures and policies in place to protect them, including training, that becomes a very serious issue. And so with that, now that we understand confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and we apply it or execute it through technical, physical, administrative safeguards, we snap it into a cybersecurity. And that framework that we're going to be talking about here is NIST. When I was in Vancouver with you guys, the very first question I got when I was in front of you was on NIST. And so I was like, it's 8 in the morning and you're asking me about NIST. But I'm very happy that was actually a thing, because this is a framework that is essentially one of the gold standards in the United States. And so when we are looking at this, we are looking at everything from the Cloud Security Alliance, ISO, DFARS, which I know a lot of members here at MTI, have some adherence to, and all of this. And so you have to be able to answer to NIST in your business, especially if you've got those government and DoD contracts. And so with that, and again, I literally do workshops on this, spending all day, but we are cranking through this. And again, my goal is to get you into this mindset. This is the complete NIST 800-171 framework. This is the standard. And when we are running a cybersecurity assessment against an organization, we are quantifying you on the 5 core functions of NIST, but we are looking at all 22 major categories and to see how you have this. When you have or see how you score against this. When you have a remote workforce, this becomes a very, very serious issue because asset management is beyond critical. If you are handing out company resources left and right to a plethora of employees as quickly as you can, who is tracking that? How do you know you're going to get those laptops, tablets, phones back, or somebody got 2 of them and now their kid's using one? You don't know these things unless you've got good asset management. I'm not going to go through all 22, but you need to understand, you need to have a risk tolerance assessment for your business, when it comes to these kinds of things. And we'll talk about that a little more. What is your access control policy? Are you using remote desktop? If so, how on earth are you securing what is essentially insecure? Is it log me in? What are you doing for data security? How are you protecting it? What are your firewalls and all of that? How are you maintaining these things? How are you detecting threat? And then you can see in the bottom, respond and recover, that entire section. What are your communication plans in case of a disaster? If everybody's cut off, do all your employees have company issued phones and you can blast text everybody, in the case of an emergency? Do you have a hierarchy of who's doing what, so you're not overwhelming your IT staff with 1,000 calls as they are trying to scramble and fix something in a disaster? These are things that we need to understand and we really need to look at, because this is what ensures the continuity for your business. If you're able to adhere to this, and I'm not saying you have to deep dive into all of these, this is a road that your business goes down as it continuously improves its technology and the defense of that technology. But you need to have this in place. You need to be in this mindset, because as you are envisioning that engine moving forward, this is what's going to keep it safe as you grow. So this is very important.
I have a question when you mention asset management.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a small business, 10 employees, everybody's on desktops, maybe 1 or 2 computers, and now we're going to have some work at home, but I don't have the money to go out and spend to buy at-home desktop computers or new laptops. And now my bookkeeper says, hey, I got a latest and greatest home computer. Why don't I just use that? Well, I mean, how do you deal with that if you don't have the money, but then you're kind of not forced, but that's an option. You start letting people use their computers.
So good question. The default policy of any organization, because of legal gray area and basically the introduction of risk, is to never let your home users use their home stuff. Primarily because, as I said before, you can't control it. You, Tom, cannot go to that employee and say, great, now you're going to put in our advanced antivirus, our monitoring system that is going to see where you're going on, whatever website you go to, and God knows what you do after hours, that kind of thing. People are very hesitant, for that. And so you lose control of that part of your cyber defense strategy in a situation like that. Now, here's the thing. I am a realist here, and if we have a lag in our supply chain in getting those electronics, I mean, I know China's now just spinning up and starting to get moving on manufacturing, but we are behind worldwide in getting these technologies. You may have no choice but to do that. You may have no choice but to have that person work from home, in which case your goal then is not necessarily to defend that user's computer if they are willing. And again, it's a gray area. If you say, hey, I want to install my antivirus, I'm like, yeah, we totally get it. Please install it on my home computer. That becomes part of your asset management. So if you are installing QuickBooks or whatever it is, and you are giving them a copy, part of your asset management should be, I just gave this person one of my licenses for QuickBooks or one of my licenses for the antivirus. But the goal in a scenario where we do not have the ability to control the machines that are incoming, the goal then is to isolate and defend the network from the remote. So the remote worker becomes a de facto threat. And we're actually going to go into that later on in the presentation as well.
Gotcha.
But it's a great question.
Thanks, Nick. One quick question is, working on a home computer, is it more important? I mean, we talked about in Vancouver that you should always log off your computer at any time. that you're not using it? I mean, is that as important at home or more important at home?
So short answer is you're not necessarily logging off your computer at home so much as you are logging off of the remote technology, and that's based on policy. And we're actually gonna go through that as well.
Okay, good.
In
Thanks.
this as well, but that's actually a really good point, and a lot of people miss that. So with that, let's talk about those technologies that you need right now to defend it, and even more so now that we are working from home, because again, we are having to defend ourselves from connections that we normally don't have to deal with as an organization. We are opening up holes and introducing risk in whatever way we're doing it, log me ins and go to my PCs included. And so the foundation of a good cyber defense strategy at the hardware level is the firewall, and it needs these critical features. And I talked about this in Vancouver as well, and this is a bit of a reiteration, but it needs to have unified threat management, which is that umbrella term for things like antivirus, anti-vulnerability, anti-spyware, web filtering, all these different kinds of things, because that is basically the first stop into your network. Our goal is to basically defend the network from threat before it gets into the network. And so the firewall sits between the world and your office. And as we have people coming in, we are starting to open up holes. And as they are connecting in to, let's say, access files or get to a remote desktop or whatever that is, now this firewall has to be there and check that threat. Because if you have an infected computer that is connecting from home, you absolutely want that firewall to see that that person is trying to infect a server in your office or wherever that is. All good firewalls are going to have zero-day updating with sandboxing. A lot of them claim this, but some of them don't do it that effectively. What this means is that in less than 24 hours, less than one day, your firewall manufacturer has to understand that there's an outbreak somewhere on the planet, figure out how to defend against it, plus a whole bunch of variants, and then get that update to your firewall so it can be defending itself. And as I mentioned in Vancouver, the average enterprise firewalls are 4 to 6 hours for outbreak, response and detection, but the top tier ones are doing it in under 5 minutes or so. And so by virtue of that, the faster you can turn around threat in the wild to defend the perimeter, the outside of your network, the more secure you're going to be. The more gap you have in that time to turn it around, the weaker that is. And there's a lot of mid-range firewalls that don't effectively do that. So I highly recommend spending a little bit of money on this. The next one is coverage for mobile devices. Mobile devices could be iPhone and Android, but it's also laptops, tablets. Mobile devices now could technically be considered desktop computers at home if you're issuing desktops or your people have to use them, which again, I don't agree with, but if you have to do it, you have to do it in this case. But that is going to wrap that connection as it goes back to the office in a layer of encryption so that it's significantly hardened as it's traveling across the internet and doesn't make you susceptible to somebody grabbing that information as it's moving from the computer to the office. Application whitelisting is another very important thing, especially for a remote workforce. If you have a remote workforce that is connecting over that VPN and they are only getting things like Word documents or specific files like QuickBooks or whatever that is, your firewall should be able to exclude every type of application except those applications, that application stack that actually makes your company run. So for example, if I'm only allowed to open up Word, Excel, and let's say QuickBooks as through the VPN, and I attempt to open up PowerPoint, the firewall is going to block me. And the reason why this is important is because one, it's going to optimize your bandwidth. So if you've got a connection that is for a home user that is pretty slow, this is going to help. The second thing it's going to do is if somebody infects one of those home computers, and let's say decides to hijack, let's say an application that is not allowed through, the application will be blocked by default. And so it lowers your surface area for attack as an organization, as you're defending that empty building where your data is right now. It needs SSL traffic decryption. Now, let me explain this. Anytime you open up a web browser and go to your bank, you should see a little green lock somewhere in your web browser. That is SSL encryption, so that as you are moving data like your login or transaction information from your bank to your house, it encrypts it. And many firewalls, range ones, decrypt this traffic. 40 to 50% of all of the traffic in your business is going to be SSL based. It's going to be that green lock based. And if your firewall can't inspect that, a lot of hackers are putting up infections or phishing sites on HTTPS or SSL encrypted websites, and your firewalls can't pick them up. And so the enterprise firewalls will actually decrypt those websites for you and actually scan those for threat, whereas an average firewall with UTM will not be able to do that effectively. It needs Microsoft login integration. This is also known as Active Directory integration. Basically, what this allows you to do is, as you are connecting through that VPN, it's going to allow you very quickly, if a problem arises, if a threat occurs, and your firewall starts screaming at you that there is some kind of threat, it's going to allow you to drill down and say, oh, it's Bill in accounting that must be infected at home because the firewall is logging Bill, as opposed to just a random address that it's spitting out to one of 100 different users. That makes it much easier to start identifying as well as controlling policies in the firewall to allow your users as they log in and out. And this actually works inside the office as well. As you log into your computer, in Windows and your network, your firewall is going to see that as it's moving traffic, so it will protect users in the office as well. And I know that you guys are going to have a good chunk of users by virtue of what you do, that will have to be in the production facilities as long as they're up. And finally, do not cheap out on this. There's a lot of things that you can cheap out on in technology. You can buy cheaper computers. I'm really not going to care, but this is so critical to the foundation. Don't buy the Ford, buy the Ferrari. This is one of those things where you need to, and you're not going to spend Ferrari money on these things. A lot of you guys probably have mid-range firewalls, and you'll probably spend 20% more on something like this, but this is going to defend you infinitely better. This is your first line of defense. And the reason why this is so critical as we talk about the next technology, which is next generation antivirus, I will say this. If the antivirus that is sitting on your computer, Windows, Mac, whatever it is, has to actually work, it actually has to kick in because it detects a threat, something has gone wrong in your cyber defense strategy. Let me say that again. If your antivirus actually has to start working, actually has to start doing something, something has gone wrong in your cyber defense strategy. The goal is to stop the threat before it gets to the computer or the device. That is beyond important. And by virtue of that, we need good defense. We need solid and managed defense on the workstations, because if something gets through, if that 12-year-old kid somewhere in the world figures out how to break everything, then we are relying on this secondary defensive measure. But this is beyond critical as well. Gone are the days of McAfee and Norton and Symantec and all of these that use a traditional methodology for downloading, updating itself, and checking for threat. The latest antivirus are utilizing machine and deep learning artificial intelligence to understand threat. So in other words, if we have Microsoft Word, a non-infected Microsoft Word, how that opens up, that engine that runs Microsoft Word as it connects to the Windows operating system or Mac is it's the same process every single time. If we are infecting a Word, Microsoft Word, for example, and we are opening it up, your artificial intelligence-based antivirus is going to say, wait a second, this is not acting right. Something is trying to mimic the process for Microsoft Word, and it's going to isolate it, it's going to shut you down. It's going to basically prevent processes from running in a way that are going to continue to infect the machine or the rest of the network. They have centralized management that are continuously monitored for threat. So one of the products that we use is based on deep learning artificial intelligence, and every single endpoint, if you have, and I'm just using easy numbers, if you have 100 users and they're all connecting, all their endpoints are connecting there, if we have an outbreak, if something gets through that firewall, then it's going to start alerting the centralization, which is then going to start looking at all of the other endpoints, and it can start excising endpoints that are a threat, because what it's basically doing is it's acting as a self-remediation tool. And so it will actually actively start fighting back, isolating parts of the network, cutting off what it considers zones or however it's configured. And we have literally seen these kinds of antivirus, when infected live with zero-day ransomware, fight back, and within 24 to 48 hours of just leaving it alone, it has excised the threat from the network. That is basically unheard of, and there is no standard McAfee Symantec type product that does that. That is a huge leap in evolution in defensive policy, which is why this is an excellent backup to that top tier firewall that nothing should get through, but it if it does, then you're fully loaded. And as I mentioned, this will cut off the remote computer in case of an infection because everything is centrally managed. If it's seeing a threat, excise it immediately. Don't wait. And you don't have the luxury of all being in an office now, because the previous thing was if we sensed a threat, IT would run over and just pull the plug on the computer or pull out the network cord. Well, you don't have that luxury, because if your 100 users or however many they are all over, your IT guy can't jump in his car and drive to 100 different places to do that.
Right.
You need to now centrally manage and hit that. And I think that's beyond important. The next one is spam filters. This is just as important as your firewall. And the reason being is that you have two real perimeters in your business, assuming that you don't have other cloud databases and all of that, which become other perimeters. You have a perimeter in your office, which your people are going to be connecting to. That's why you need that good firewall. But the other perimeter, the way hackers are getting information, is through email. And so you need a good spam filter as well. And we're going to go through that. A cloud-based spam filtering solution, hands down, is superior to in-house. So if you have a physical server, like a Microsoft Exchange server, physically in your office that is actually running your email for you, you can get a spam filter in the cloud as opposed to have another server in your office or that server itself do it. The cloud updates itself much faster, but it also offers a lot of different things that we're going to be talking about here that on-premise solution doesn't offer. It has that same zero-day outbreak defense as a firewall. And in fact, the enterprise level spam filters and the enterprise level firewalls, they're different companies, but they have alliances that start sharing threat information. And so when those top tier enterprise firewalls catch a threat or a new virus in the wild, they start inoculating the spam filters. When the spam filters catch a new technique or tactic or website that is malicious, and we are seeing a ton of those being spun up all around COVID-19 or coronavirus, they will immediately inoculate the firewalls as well. And so this combination makes it much tougher to get anything through, whether it's email, downloading a file, going to a website. This is one of the most aggressive combinations on the technology side that you can have for your business. These should not just filter attachments like PDFs and images. We can infect pretty much anything in an attachment, but it should also be doing URLs, meaning websites. So if I am getting sent, or one of your employees is getting sent something that says, oh, check out the WHO's coronavirus thing, and it's complete BS, as they click that link, they should be redirected to the spam filter. That will then basically scan that site for them as that defense, as well as your firewall, and it's going to block that malicious site. So it's got to go just beyond the actual documents that you get or the responses to email. It has to have continuity of service feature to ensure uptime. I do not recommend, if you're on Office 365, and a good chunk of you are on Office 365, I don't recommend actually using their spam filter for a couple of different reasons. One, their default spam filter is not nearly as effective as enterprise third-party spam filters, although Microsoft ATP is getting better. But the second thing is that as we are seeing our infrastructure stressed, what a third-party spam filter is going to offer is continuity of service. If your email goes down, if Office 365 goes down, or your email server in your office, you can log into your spam filter and keep collecting the new mail and send as yourself. Everybody has basically their own mailbox there. And so while you don't have your history or your calendar and everything, it keeps the communication going as you are conversing with your partners, your employees, everything else. And that is super important, especially when we are going to start very heavily taxing the coronavirus as it continues to ramp up. And so with that, let's talk about one of the most important things that we have in cybersecurity right now. So we've talked about the technical solutions that are going to protect your office, protect your endpoints, protect your email traffic as it comes in. Where we are moving in the cybersecurity community as a whole is to identity management. And we are integrating that into the technologies because identity management is one of those things that is beyond important, and the traditional identity managements are starting to fall down. As we see so many usernames and passwords get dumped into the dark web, without something like this, you're just ripe for compromise, and we see this continuously. So this basically has multiple categories that we need to understand as we are quantifying what an identity is. So this would be your user's identity within the network. It would also be organizations inside and outside of your network. You need to start identifying those in your supply chain that possibly have access. Also, what departments do you have? You have production and sales and accounting and marketing and on and on and on. because we are moving data. The goal is possibly if one organization gets hit, we can literally excise an entire organization inside or outside to basically block that threat. We're looking at applications as well. We talked about application whitelisting, but as you are pumping out, in Tom's example, let's say he's giving 10 of his employees 10 licenses for QuickBooks, we need to start identifying QuickBooks as a potential threat because QuickBooks can be hijacked, as can Microsoft Word and a whole bunch of other different programs. Also devices, as we spin up IoT devices, whether it's phone systems, video cameras, DVRs, we are seeing a massive, massive rise in this. And recently it was discovered that the Russian FSB actually was building their own botnet attack system to hijack IoT devices for corporations, not necessarily to exfiltrate data, but they were looking to turn on cameras and microphones to record things like this. So we need to start identifying absolutely everything. This is also when good asset management comes into place as well. And basically anything with a set of attributes that is related to your business. That is the default definition of this as well, needs to be identified and quantified in some way. And if you're thinking, oh my God, there's just so much of this, we start with the basics. Start with identifying your users and your technology and then move on from there. But basically your company's default Microsoft login is being outclassed. We all need Active Directory. That's Microsoft login that I'm talking about, whether it's here or in the cloud. But here's the problem is that if you are only running that and nobody is watching the barn, I can be sitting here literally, and I had this issue with one of my clients. They were getting hit from Vietnam at 50,000 passwords a second against their administrator, and nobody was watching this. They were wondering why everything was slow. They got their phone system compromised, and they were attacking the server when they called us in. And this was, I'm like, well, nobody's looking at this, but you can see every single log entry, and Microsoft makes a lot of them. Nobody is watching this. And so by virtue of that, what we are looking for is a solution that is going to do a couple of different things. One, it's going to offer you SSO or single sign-on. This means that if you have, let's say, remote access into the network with your Microsoft login, you have access to a database in the cloud, you have access to Office 365, you can log in to a single sign-on portal, and when you log into one, you will log into all 3 or 5 or whatever. So it makes it very easy to basically log in one place and then get access to your entire suite of products. Now, we defend that with multi-factor authentication. And if you saw me in Vancouver, you saw me hold up my phone with an app on it, and every 30 seconds a code would change. This is what we are talking about here. There should be no exceptions to any of your logins for multi-factor authentication. And the reason being is that as we are stealing usernames and passwords or finding them in the dark web, the multi-factor authentication becomes basically that variable. Inevitably, and I'm sure in one of the future presentations I'll do for the MTI, as long as I know all the domains, everybody's company website, I will run everybody through the dark web, and I will literally hand you a report of all the usernames and passwords that we can find in the dark web. And inevitably, and I do this at every conference, or it happens at every conference, somebody comes up to me and says, you just handed me the password I've been using for like the last decade. Holy shit. This is what we're talking about here. But the nice part about a centralized identity management system is that if you have that, let's say, person that is impersonating, Tom, trying to log into that network 50,000 times from Vietnam, the identity management system is seeing this in real time and saying, wait a second, Tom's not supposed to be in Vietnam. Tom is geofenced to the continental United States or Florida or wherever that is. Nor would Tom be logging in 50,000 times. That is unusual behavior. Something must be wrong. And then it will cut Tom off of the network. And that's what we want. We want that automated cutoff so that IT can then be alerted to say, oh, well, wait a second, Tom just got cut off. And you'll usually know before your IT does, because Tom will be calling the office saying, what the heck, why can't I log in? And so by virtue of that, it gives you a very easy way to start defending the network, especially for remote users that, again, you don't have visibility, as they're not sitting in your office. So I think that's a very important thing. And with that, let's talk about contingency planning. And were there any other questions?
So there's one question that came out. So you've talked about a number of different things: firewalls,
yes,
deep learning, AI, and antivirus software. Could you give some suggestions as to products that our members would want to look in each of those areas, so they at least know where to go to what
yes,
they should be looking at?
Yeah. So since this is not going to be public, like you guys aren't putting it on YouTube or anything like that, for the general audience, right? For the general public?
Just internal.
Just
Yeah,
internal. Okay.
Well,
MTI members.
we make it a private link on YouTube so we can at least have a place to house it, to put it
Oh
out.
no, that's fine. My point is that usually when I'm recommending products, I don't like to do that publicly. And I probably should have told you that ahead of time. The reason being is that as I'm recommending products, and we vet our products every 90 days, so these products may change, but
Right.
some of them have been consistently good. The problem that we have is that if somebody is watching this that's malicious, and we as a security company are always under attack, they now have a roadmap to the products that we are recommending. And so I never publicly endorse products, but because this is internal to MTI, I'm more than happy. So
let's do this. If it makes you a little bit more comfortable, you could email those, if you want to email those to me, and then I could just email them to people on this webcast. And that makes it pretty simple.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that as well.
Let's do that. Let's do that, because that makes it easy for you to go down and say, okay, here's all the areas we talked about. Here's some suggestions that you might look into, and then we can make that available on our coronavirus resource page.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely happy to do that. And I will just say this, that there's a lot of mid-range players out there, and a lot of you guys are running those mid-range players. So those might be like the Norton antivirus, Symantec, McAfee, WebRoot, stuff like that. On the firewall side, that might be SonicWall, WatchGuard, Sophos, all of those. There are products out there that are vastly superior in terms of their threat detection. On the scale, if you are doing nothing and you are putting in a mid-range product like a SonicWall, for example, you are infinitely better off than just going to Best Buy and getting the $50 special or whatever it is. But the gap between that SonicWall and the enterprise level players is huge.
Mm-hmm.
The capability for threat detection, when we are talking about reading articles of like, oh, this group discovered a new threat in the wild everybody should be aware of, it's usually the enterprise firewall discovery teams that are doing these, because they're literally on the bleeding edge, and by virtue of that, they are pumping that bleeding edge defense capability into their firewalls, and it works fantastically well. Okay. And so when I am giving you these examples, these all got vetted as of March 1st again, because basically the first of every quarter, I go through and I vet every single product to make sure, because I can't walk into a Fortune 100 company or a large government with a SonicWall. I would get walked right out the door.
Right.
Yeah. I have to be competitive, and so that is a constant thing for us. But I'm more than happy to send out that list of recommendations, and believe me, I am not shy on recommending things. I'm just shy in public.
Right. No, if you can do that for us after this is over, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Oh, and I should also say too that this entire slide deck, we have it in a handout format that's like 2 or 3 pages long that goes through all of this, and I will absolutely give that to you, Tom, for your members.
Awesome. That we'll have that posted to everybody as soon as he gets it in our hands.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, I'm more than happy to take phone calls, and I've been working with other large organizations. I'm happy to do that for you guys as well. You guys have been great. So.
Thanks a lot, Nick.
All right. So with that, let's talk about contingency planning, because I think that's a very important thing. So part of it is the disaster recovery. You need disaster recovery, but we cannot just focus on the technical solution here. And so when we are looking at doing a full-blown contingency plan, and this becomes beyond critical, especially in an emergency situation like coronavirus, where everybody is scrambling to move, shelter in place, whatever that is. My state here in Illinois, we are being ordered to stay in. So contingency planning is one of those things that ensures that as I move my workforce from an office to remote, it's going to be a lot smoother. One of that is to establish that communication system for during and after the event. And so there are many different types of disasters, but if you have a hierarchy and an understanding of basically who is doing what in terms of coordinating and communicating, that is beyond important. Oftentimes in a disaster, employees don't necessarily know what's going on. It could be a frightened or panicked situation. It could be very stressful for your internal first responders, like your IT department or whatever else that is. And so establishing that line of communication is absolutely beyond critical. Also, create recovery and response thresholds with priorities. This is so beyond critical. And I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization where I am talking to, like, let's say the IT director, and they don't have this written down, but the IT director off the top of his head can say, well, I restore this, then this, then this, I exclude this, I can do this within 24 hours. I know what my priorities are, whatever that is. And I say, great, what if you're hit by a bus? What if you're fired? What if you quit? Like that knowledge goes away. And in a disaster, you don't necessarily know, where this is going to be. So for example, I might have a coronavirus get knocked on my butt for the next week. And I've got plans in place that are going to ensure that my employees are being communicated with by other people in my staff that are alerted. They're going to know what their jobs and tasks are by virtue of everything that we've created. I also know our restoration times in a disaster. And what a lot of problems that I see is, especially when you are outsourcing to a third-party IT, they will come in with what could be a great, backup solution for disaster recovery, saying, oh, we're going to back up on site, which you should, and then we're going to replicate it to the cloud, which you should. But what oftentimes they're saying is, okay, if we're doing the calculation, you'll get restored in 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever that is, depending on your size. But you don't necessarily know if that's good. That may be horrible for your business. If you cannot quantify in hard and soft dollars for me, how many computers can be down for how long, you're at a serious disadvantage here, because while it sounds good on paper, it is going to lose you a ton of money or possibly put you out of business depending on how bad the disaster is. And so these are things that all organizations should go through. They need to go through a risk tolerance. Create those roles and responsibilities for those key employees. I will tell you this right now, this is beyond one of the most important things I can do. And when I'm talking to technical leadership, as I'm brought in to consult with, let's say, C-level, one of the things I am telling them is leave your IT person alone in the disaster, because if you're calling them every 60 seconds, are we up yet? What's going on? Can I get to my email now? What's going on? Are we up yet? They're not going to be able to focus. And so you have to set these thresholds. You have to have roles and responsibilities, whether it is somebody that's going to take those calls from that. But the more you have this streamlined, the smoother any transition through a disaster is going to be, hands down. And also you have to create for every type of disaster. So for example, Tom's in Florida, he's got to worry about hurricanes. I don't have to in Chicago, but we are earthquake and tornado prone. So how do we do that? What are we doing with hacking events? If you get ransomed, it's a lot different. A contingency plan in a hacking event, I don't have to clear out a building. In an earthquake or a hurricane, I'm going to have to evacuate. And so having these different plans and scenarios, in mind for what is critical to you, let's say your geographical region, is very important as well. Execute the disaster recovery plan to restore those operations once you have all of these things. And also I would practice it as well. And a lot of IT departments will practice, what their roles and responsibilities are, and basically perform an impact analysis as well. Like I mentioned, in hard dollars, if you don't understand what a hurricane is going to do to you, or an earthquake or a tornado or a ransomware event, that is a very, very serious problem. Almost none of your organizations, I would put money on it, does a risk tolerance analysis. I see almost no organizations, even at the Fortune 100 level, that can quantify in hard and soft dollars. And there's a lot of organizations out there that can help you with that, mine included, obviously, but getting that understanding really lets you know what is good to recover. Can production only be down for 6 hours, but marketing can be down for a week and nobody cares? I mean, these are the things you have to understand. And inevitably, when I walk into these situations and I say, okay, well, how long can you be down for? I'm always going to get one CFO or one CEO that says, well, never. We can never, ever go down. And I say, great, we can absolutely do that. That'll probably be about $1 million. Well, maybe we can be down for 6 hours. Maybe 12, maybe 24, maybe it's a week. You have to figure that out. You have to quantify that, and in this situation where we've got, shifting laws that are, being put into place, and are we going back to work? Are we not? Whatever. These kinds of things become very important. They really do. And now's the time to really do them, especially if you've got downtime, in production, if contracts are spinning down or being paused. Now's the time to start focusing on this kind of stuff. And document the disaster. A lot of companies don't do this. They will go through a ransomware event or something like that when they get hacked, and they will come out on the end of it and say, oh, thank God, everything's back to normal. Figure this out. Improvement plan. It's the first thing we do if we have a client when we are going through ransomware. After remediation, identification of the threat and remediation of the threat, we sit down and say, okay, what did you see? What did you do? What did we do? How did this work? Where were the gaps? And then by virtue of that, we improve the plan. It's very easy to do. And this is something that you can direct your IT staff to do as well. You are going to have to have as an owner, the buy-in in terms of the financial responsibility of the organization. But a lot of this can be outsourced to your IT staff, and third-party IT companies are so in helping you with this. A lot of them focus on the data security side of that, which is one subset of cybersecurity. Most third-party IT companies are not cybersecurity outfits by any stretch, and I think we talked about that in Vancouver as well. So with that, let's talk about some of the advanced security policies that we can put into place here. Enforce good passwords. I cannot stress this enough. Even if you need the multi-factor authentication, which is the next thing, make sure you have good passwords. Ideally, you've got a password that's going to force them, or a password policy that's going to force them to change that every 60 to 90 days. 30 ideally, 90 is, I think, is pushing it, but slightly acceptable. 60 seems to be the sweet spot, especially with remote workers, because if they have something that's infected, this may be one of those few things that is going to keep that network safe as you are forcing those password changes through the VPN or the login or however you're doing it. Enable that multi-factor authentication on everything in your life, everything from Facebook to Amazon to most of the cloud services like Microsoft 365. They all have it. You can do it for free in 365, although I recommend backing it with an identity management solution.
So Nick, real
yes.
quick, best practices for password determination, the 4 characters, how long?
4 character, yeah. So I would recommend 4 character sets. Meaning uppercase, lowercase numbers, and special characters like question marks, exclamation points, etc. I would recommend a password of no less than 11 characters, and that goes for any platform. If you're Android, no more than somewhere between 11 to 14, but no more than 14 on Android. Okay. And if you're thinking, Nick, you're absolutely high. If you think I'm punching in a 14-character password on a mobile phone, you have biometrics. It opens with your face. It opens with your thumb. The only time I ever see my 14-character password on my Android is when I have to reboot the thing for updating or whatever. But that is the default policy that you guys should be running, and you should be enforcing password complexity options in your network policies as well.
Got it.
Limit access, basically to login hours. If you have employees that work 9 to 5, make it 8:30 to 5:30. This may not necessarily include the executive level. I'm one of these people that will work all hours of the night. But if you are limiting that availability, then when we have hackers on the other side of the planet that are hitting us when we're in sleep and 2 a.m. and nobody's watching this, that is one of those things that's going to save you, because you're now, again, massively lowering your surface area for attack by not allowing logins except during business hours. And your employees are probably not going to want it anyway, if they're normally punching a clock from X time to X time. So by virtue of that, these can be turned on and turned off at will, and a lot of IT staff and companies just miss that, but it's a very, very powerful thing to do. Also, if you have computers that you are issuing remote, you have the ability, because you own it as the corporation, to limit access to things like control panel, the installation or removal of applications and features, and all of that. So many computers go out there, and then people say, well, I want to customize my desktop and download a wallpaper, or I want to install this, or I want to go to the control panel and do God knows what. They don't need it. You own the computer. That's the whole point. Every single employee in my organization, we issue the laptop, we set the standards, we encrypt it, we issue the cell phones, we encrypt them, we have the policies. And if they need to install something, then it can alert IT, and then IT can get involved and vet that product. So many fake updates for things like Adobe Flash and everything else are out there, and the user may think they are legitimately trying to update something, and they're not. And this is why we do these kinds of things. If you own the technology, you have the ability to do this. If your users are working from home on their own equipment, basically it's going to be torches and pitchforks if you try to shut them off from being able to install whatever they want. That's why home users introduce risk when they're using home technology. Also, limit access to needless data removal. So in this case, a lot of organizations, especially internally, they allow access to plug in a USB drive. Well, I can copy stuff out on a USB drive and walk out the door, just like I can install Dropbox. A lot of companies are dealing with what's called shadow IT, which means you have regular IT, but for whatever reason, one of your users or multiple of them don't like to go from point A to point B as you've defined and say, well, I just want to work from home, so I'm going to install Dropbox and then start synchronizing company files into my personal Dropbox account so I can go work from home. And they may be well-meaning, it may be legitimate, but at that point, you have lost control of that data. If that person copies it out of there, if they do anything else with that data, like take it to a competitor or something like that, you basically have no recourse for that because you've already let that out. So if you don't need to use that kind of technology, then I would do things like ban flash drives if you're not going to use them. I would sharing things unless you have a specific case. And in some cases, you might have 3 people, like sales guys, that need Dropbox or something to share files with, prospects or something. Then they can have it. You can enable it. You can set up network policies that allow you to do that, and then everybody else doesn't get it because they technically don't need it. It's not part of their job. So these are things that, as we are looking at your existing network, that you can do right now and start really cleaning that up and locking that down. Now with that, let's talk about some proactive defense measures here. So you need, especially for a remote workforce, you need remote managed monitoring. Basically, this is an agent that you will install on the computer that you are issuing. And a lot of people would not want this on their home computers, but you can ask. It's, again, gray area legally. This will make sure the computer is up to date. We have to keep them up to date for vulnerability, as we talked about. This also typically will plug into a basic antivirus, like a web root, or if you're running one of those basic ones and you don't have an advanced antivirus like we were talking about, because then it will start alerting IT. It will give your IT staff eyeballs centrally on your entire fleet of technology as it is basically dispersed wherever it is where your employees are. That is something that is great in an office. It is absolutely essential here, and you'll pay a little bit per month. And if you're working with a third-party IT company, odds are they're doing this for you, or they're already recommending it. And so they'll have their own solution. And there's Continuum and Kaseya and Ninja and SolarWinds. There's a million of these out there. They all basically do the same thing. The next one is monitoring and managing your security infrastructure. And this is a SIM, security informations and events management. Basically, what this does is this ties into that advanced firewall. This ties into your critical servers. It looks at all of these things in real time. And as you see an incoming threat, an incoming attack, it starts monitoring and alerting basically humans in a SOC, a security operations center, that can then either remediate it for you on the fly or alert your IT automatically. If you were in Vancouver, you heard me talk about the average time it takes for me to break into a network and steal one single file per FBI statistics, and that's 224 days. I can be hitting you for 224 days. If you have a SIM, it takes that down from months to minutes, sometimes seconds. The fastest remediation we've ever had on a threat like this is under 60 seconds. The average when we are working with some kind of SIM is usually 3 to 5 minutes for an incoming live attack or threat against our infrastructure. It's that good. It's not that expensive to do, but it's light years ahead, especially because you're not going to have physical IT in your buildings most likely. This is that thing that is going to protect you and alert when you're getting hit. The next one is reviewing configurations. I can't tell you how many times we've walked into an organization where they've made changes. In this case, we're making changes because we're going from internal to remote, where they open up things in firewalls that shouldn't be, or they tweak antivirus to let things in that shouldn't, or they had to temporarily and then forgot to put it back into place and stuff like that. When you are done with your transition, moving all of your people remotely, your IT staff should be looking to say, okay, did we open up something we shouldn't? We should be testing these kinds of things, to make sure that we have closed all of these gaps that we had to open temporarily as we were trying to figure out how to get all this to work. And now we've opened up more gaps than we should. And by virtue of that, one of those things we absolutely recommend for clients is running periodic penetration testing. So if you are going through a massive work from home and your IT staff says, okay, we've checked the firewalls and we've checked all the external technologies, then have an organization, doesn't have to be me, just have some cybersecurity organization that actually does vulnerability testing, penetration testing, run it on the outside. That is going to be that reassurance that you have. And if you have any kind of compliances for DFARS, NIST, PCI, even HIPAA compliance, something like that, you should be getting periodic penetration testing quarterly. That's usually what we do. Our more massive organizations that we deal with usually have penetration testing anywhere from once every 2 hours to once every 2 days, because they are so huge. So with that, that is something that is going to basically cross the T's and dot the I's to make sure you're not introducing more risk than you need to. And these things can usually be spun up and run pretty quickly. And Tom, yes.
No, go ahead and finish.
Oh, well, I have one last point here. And also monitor the dark web. I saw you raising your hand, so I thought you had a question. So yeah, we monitor the dark web. This is our canary in the coal mine. As I mentioned, we have an ever-growing database of literally at this point billions and billions of usernames and passwords. Some of them are invalid, some of them are brand new, and we can get them from massive Fortune 100 corporations just by searching for their domains. Everybody is pretty much in these databases. And so if you are doing this, and it's fairly inexpensive to do, as soon as you get something that is dumped, whether it's an old password, a brand new password, whatever, then you get an alert, and then you can remediate. Then you can start changing those passwords. That is something that's pretty easy to do, and it can be spun up pretty quickly. Tom, yes.
So yeah, so we have answered really most all the questions that everybody's passed through, but one last one that Joanna Lisa had was the impact analysis template. Do you have a template for that you might be able to pass on to us that members could look through, or is that?
Yeah, so I have a default template for contingency planning. It's based off of the NIST 800 contingency plan, but whereas theirs is like 130 pages, mine's like 40. So it's a little easier to manage.
Okay.
But that will walk you through everything from your communication trees to asset identifying for critical infrastructure, role-based, everything. And I'm more than happy to give it to you guys. So
Okay,
by virtue of that, Tom, just remind me of that at the end of this, and I will attach that. It's a Word document, and you guys can basically have at it with it, but it's something that you should do and you should revise, on a regular basis. A lot of companies do it annually, or if they make a massive change, the bigger companies usually do it quarterly.
Okay.
So it's a good question though. And again, I'm happy to share resources. So, I mean, we're all in this together. And the last thing I want is any MTI member getting hit. And so if you've got the time to sit there and plan the contingencies for your company, and I pray all of you do, then I am more than happy to supply that documentation for you.
Sounds good. We appreciate that, Nick.
No, anytime. And with that, let's talk about improvement planning real quick. So it's not just for recovery, but you should have quarterly to annual improvement plans that are no more than 2 years out. And the reason being is that while technology incrementally improves, cyber defense strategies are radically changing, because again, we don't know when that 12-year-old kid is going to just blow the doors off of everything, or the Russians or the Chinese or even the NSA is going to come up with something that has us scrambling to rewrite the book. But you should always have a typical defensive strategy that you are improving on. You should have goals quarterly, annually, that are moving you forward. Nobody is going to go from 0 to Fort Knox overnight. And you may need that 0-day, enterprise level firewall, and you may need that next generation antivirus and everything that I've just listed out here. But I'm not expecting basically, anybody here to be Oprah. You get a firewall and you get a firewall. Everybody gets a firewall. Nobody's going to be like that. I get that, because we all have budgets and we're coming into possibly a very hard economic time. But now is the time to start enhancing that because we are going to see, hackers continue to innovate. And that was the exact problem we had in 2008. It was a disaster for us economically in that recession, but companies stopped spending on cyber defense strategies, which was hard hit, for companies like mine. My IT company did great, but cybersecurity, nobody wanted to talk to us. But the problem was hackers kept innovating. They didn't stop just because you did. And so when a lot of companies emerged and started spending money again in 2014, 15, we saw a massive influx, as did my entire industry, a massive influx of companies saying, oh my God, please help. So that is something that we really need to take into consideration as well. I would do a cybersecurity assessment based off of a framework like NIST. If you go to your IT, let's say you have a third-party IT company, and ask for a cybersecurity assessment, understand you are not going to get a cybersecurity assessment. At best, you're going to get a data security assessment. They're going to run an asset identifier. They're going to tell you some basic things like your password policy sucks, all of that. A cybersecurity actual assessment is very comprehensive. So I can do a data security assessment like an IT company in like a week or two, crank out a report. Most of it's automated. Our cybersecurity assessments are usually 2 months plus. They average somewhere between 700 to 1,500 pages long. The first 60 pages of which are custom written by me, and they encompass basically a holistic framework like NIST 800-171. And you will note data security is one of 22 categories of 5 functions. And so IT companies and typically IT staff love to live in the data security side, possibly a little bit in the protective technology side, and everything else gets fallen through the wayside. So have a comprehensive cybersecurity assessment done, like a top-level NIST review, which is not nearly as expensive as a full-blown NIST review, and that will literally score you on those 22 categories and see where you need to start improving. Set a proper and accurate budget. As I said, your CEO is not Oprah by any stretch of the imagination, but set a realistic budget and understand that sometimes as technology shifts and change, you may have to spend a little more one quarter, and other quarters you may spend less, or you may have to delay something because a newer technology that is mitigating threat in a way we've never seen before just came out, and that's something that we really need to adopt. So again, there's a certain amount of fluidity as we plan in cybersecurity that, you know, IT can be fairly set in their ways. A computer's a computer. We all know it's eventually going to be Windows 11 and then 12, and you know that's slow change. But in cybersecurity, we have to pivot on a dime. That's also why we review every single piece of defensive technology we use every 90 days. And we are hardcore. I basically take 3 days off and do that every 90 days because I have to. And understand how these are going to help improve your company achieve its vision. When I am coaching the C-level, it's the CEO that has the vision that is going to drive that company for the next 5-10 years for its growth and its expansion. It's the CFO that is going to fund it. It's the CIO that is going to ensure the infrastructure is up and running to make sure that that is there as the workforce expands, as you expand locations. But it's cybersecurity that is going to be that shield around the organization that is going to protect you from those external threats, that are going to give you that flexibility to continue to grow. And I will say this, as you adopt new technologies in your industry, as you adopt new technologies in general, if you are not marrying them with an understanding of risk and an understanding of cybersecurity, you are asking for serious trouble. That is something that everybody falls down on. I am the first person to get all of the stupid gadgets on the planet, you know, but I understand how to use them safely and securely, and I have a pretty big tinfoil hat, and you don't have to, but people around you absolutely should, and you should recognize that need. Now with that, and I think we have just 2 more slides. Like I said, is about an hour and a half presentation or so. These are the critical components for cyber defense. This is everything that your company, or the critical things rather, not everything, but the critical things that your company should be running right now. And if it's not, it should be planning for these things. It's that next generation firewall that we talked about and went through in depth. It's that next generation antivirus we also talked about and went through in depth. It's enterprise level switches and wireless access points as well. And the reason being is that those have the ability to get plugged into that monitored 24/7 SIM. So if somebody gets into your network and starts hijacking wireless access points, which we do see a bit of, or decides to spin up a rogue access point, which I believe I showed you how I do that in Vancouver, basically, as we are monitoring for this, we can mitigate these things instantly and lock that threat out. That is beyond important. Encryption systems. As you work remote, if you are issuing company-issued phones, laptops, tablets, you should be encrypting them. iPhone and Android encrypt by default. You can turn that on and you're good. You can get encryption systems for your Windows computers and Mac. Windows comes based with BitLocker encryption. It is not turned on by default. You can turn it on. BitLocker, to be perfectly honest, is kind of crappy, but it meets the encryption standard, and you can centrally manage through like a mobile device management system the encryption. But you have to encrypt the devices that you own, because if they're ever lost or stolen, and again, they're going to be out of your office, so you don't know when an employee is going to throw it in their car and go into a bad neighborhood and leave it there as they run into a store or something. This is going to protect that confidential data, especially if you've got DoD contracts or running DFARS. Get that advanced identity management system for single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. This is going to be that real stopgap measure as people are logging into every asset that you have, because if their usernames are hijacked, you know, in the dark web and all of that, this is what's going to be basically preventing them, you know, from maliciously getting into your network, or a hacker impersonating one of your people. Awareness and training programs as well. This is beyond critical. With most of our clients, especially when we're going through assessments, we actually send out phishing emails to all of our clients' employees to see who opens it. And I will tell you this, 99% of the time, the CEO is usually the one opening the malicious email. But this gives us the ability to then start tracking and understanding who is really going to believe that Prince Ubuntu from Nigeria really does need, you know, their help with the revolution. I mean, these are things that are very basic. This becomes a not a gotcha moment for your employees, but an awareness. And as they are going remote, and as they are accessing, let's say, your technology on possibly their home computers, this becomes all the more critical, because as they start answering these phishing emails that are exploding right now with fake coronavirus anything, they're going to get those computers infected, and then they're introducing risk as they remote in any way into your network. This is beyond important. This is actually very inexpensive to do as well. And this is one of the biggest tools that we have in the arsenal. The 5 laws of cybersecurity. Law number 3 is humans trust even when they shouldn't. And this is exactly why we have this. Now, what this is basically things like asset management, which I hope I've pounded into you guys a little bit, policies, processes, procedures for passwords, and everything else. But these, what you're seeing on this list, are the core functional hardware, software, and services that you should be running to fully defend a mobile workforce, and a workforce that is internal to your network as well. But when you've got a mobile workforce, you don't have that normal physical visibility. You can't walk into their office or cubicle. This is what's going to give you that insight into what they're doing and how you're defending them. And with that, this is our last slide beyond my contact info. Here's the things that you can do right now that you can start planning on to really start ramping this up. One, your IT needs to calculate the bandwidth needs of your remote workforce. And if they are not doing this, when you send out that remote workforce, you could slow everybody down to a crawl, and now you have a whole new scenario and a whole new problem. Make sure that whatever technology solution that you choose, you're going to have enough bandwidth capability in your office if they have to connect to your office to get in. That is beyond important, and I've seen a lot of companies just make assumptions and fall down on this. It's an easy calculation for IT to make for bandwidth and session traffic and all this kind of stuff. All infrastructure needs to be updated, especially if you're going to start shuttering your offices and you're sending your IT people home to work remote. You need to update this while they're still on site, ideally. Everything needs to be up to date. They need to be checking these things. We are seeing a massive explosion in basically vulnerability scanning against public infrastructure, meaning the front end of your firewalls, mine, and all of this. The average firewall was getting scanned 44 times a day. It is about 10 times larger than that right now. That is why the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition, was created, because we are seeing these massive infrastructures identified and hit across all verticals, not just hospital, and we are trying to actively fight that. It's a serious, serious issue. All software needs to be updated and checked as well. If you're running that older version of Adobe Flash, update it before that laptop leaves the building and all of that, as well as Microsoft Windows. Any programs that you're running that are older may introduce risk. If, in Tom's example, if he's running an older version of QuickBooks, again, we have a database full of vulnerability that I can then look to see, oh, he's running QuickBooks 2015. Well, here's a whole bunch of ways that I can just compromise or bypass the encryption system in QuickBooks 2015. And so I can just run those. I don't even have to reinvent the wheel. I just have to identify what he's running, and other researchers and hackers have done the work for me. This is why we keep things as up-to-date as humanly possible. I also understand some of you are probably running older databases that are specific to your vertical that are very proprietary and very expensive, and they might be older versions. Like Vantage. I see a lot of Vantage, for example, in a lot of different CNC and manufacturing places. I don't know if that's big in the MTI world as well. And so some companies will say, well, I'm not going to be spending the $200,000 to upgrade this. And there are different considerations for that we are about to go through right here. And before we do, you need to understand what is the best option for you. If you're halfway through a cloud migration, maybe you just continue migrating to the cloud. Maybe it's a VPN to the office, in which case we're going to be checking on bandwidth. Are you going to be using remote desktop to a server? Is everybody just going to remote into the desktop in their office? In which case, how are you policing out so they can't transfer files to their home computer if they're using a home computer? Is it remote access like LogMeIn? Do you have the bandwidth and speed to be able to sustain that as well? These are considerations that you should make, and then it should be a uniform decision that everybody does this one way or the other. There should be no situation where anybody, the CEO even says, well, they're all doing it this, but I prefer this because this is easier for me. That introduces risk, because now we've got to open up another hole, and we are increasing that surface area for attack. And the other thing too, if you've got a whole lot of infrastructure, meaning computers, printers, all this that are going to be dormant, basically, if you have, let's say, 2 or 3 servers that everything needs to be accessed on, and everything else in your network is going to be shut down, your IT can reconfigure your network so that when the VPN people or the remote people or whoever come in, they don't have access to query the entire network. And while we're not worried about our actual employees doing that, if I am able to maliciously access your network and I can see the whole thing, while you're out, I'm going to infect printers. I'm going to infect IoT devices. I'm going to infect computers. I'm going to bypass a lot of your security protocols. I'm going to hit your firewalls. This is what we do when we are hijacking an organization or a company. And if I am limited in that scope, I have a lot less devices. I can't hit those printers. I can't hit those other things because nobody's going to use the printer in the office. And so we are carving out basically a micro network, a smaller network to allow that access in. Your VPNs can be configured so they only have access to the resources they need. Don't give them the default access, which gives them access equal to a computer in your office. That is beyond critical. And that also helps defend that software that is super expensive that you don't want to upgrade because you've had it for a decade and it's just too cost prohibitive. If we are isolating those things, because let's say they're not needed or they are, now we're lowering that, again, that serviced area, and everything is behind that firewall that is super awesome. So when the traffic is coming in, it's automatically being checked. We can do these things fairly easily, and your IT staff should be able to retool that for a remote workforce, and that will mitigate a ton of threat for you right out of the gate. And with that, are there any questions? And again, I'm more than happy to jump on like a Zoom meeting or whatever. I'm sorry I'm under the weather today, and I'm hoping it's not COVID, we'll see. But like I said, I'm happy to talk to anybody, and I do daily video and audio and all that. And are there any questions right now? I'll stay on for as long as you guys want or need.
Well, all I have to say is you are the Einstein of cybersecurity, my friend. You have a wealth of knowledge sitting there. I appreciate you taking the time. No other further questions have been posed. Jim, do you have any questions at all?
No, I don't. A lot of information, Nick. Thank you. Certainly appreciate you taking the time and going through this, and it's makes you think about a lot of things. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. Like
Nick,
I said, our goal here is just to defend the planet, and I hope this helps.
We appreciate that we got you on our team for sure. So
yeah,
I'll send you a quick email once we log off with just the 3 or 4 things that you indicated you could provide, and as soon as you can get those to us, we can put it out with the video. Would be awesome.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Happy to do it, and thank you everybody for your time. I know this was scheduled for an hour, and it's about an hour and a half or so, but I hope it's valuable information. And again, I would like to be a resource for you guys, if you need it.
Well, it's a lot, but it's important. So members, Jim, thank you so much for being here as president. Nick, thank you very much. And everybody, as I always say, fight, fight, fight to the end of this, because it's going to end at some point in time. And you want to be better after this. You'll be stronger because you're not MTI strong. You're MTI strong all day long. Have a good day, everybody. Have a good day.